Good evening, everyone. So thank you so much for being here with us for our networking event, The Future's Ours, taking responsibility to count us in. We are alive in one of the most important eras where the course of our future direction is in our hands and is of the most critical to ever before. We are the generation to make change and gain speed to a better tomorrow. NACI Connecticut, being one of the 30 chapters of the National Association of Health Service Executives, is so grateful for your ongoing strategies and steadfast thoroughness during this very unprecedented time while we're facing COVID-19 and the ongoing efforts to combat systemic racism. We thank you all for your direct and indirect impact each of you have made and continue to make to be active in the best way that we can, which is one of the reasons we are here tonight, to greet, meet, and find different mechanisms to positively reinforce voter registration in the census 2020. So now at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our chapter's parliamentarian, Allison Jocelyn. And I do ask that as you join the call, please place yourself on mute, and then we'll transition over to our speakers. So Allison, the floor is yours.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I think we can go to the next slide. I'm Allison Jocelyn. I'm the parliamentarian of NACI Connecticut and also the acting interim chair of the Public Policy and Advocacy. And we welcome you to this event. Go to the next slide. So for today's agenda, we just want to share the welcome and introductions and overview of the Census 2020. We'll go over some poll questions and get to know our speakers more, and also a Q&A and an open discussion. We'll go to the next slide.
And where did you get that?
Okay, so today is also about celebration. We celebrate you and we celebrate the journey that has brought us together. For the month of August, we leveraged social media, newsletters, and connected with community organizers. For example, on week one, the first week of August, we shared the critical importance of registration and voter registration, and just in time for the primary elections in Connecticut. For week two, we attended the Move Into Educate event hosted SOCA Run for Justice, and was joined by leaders and local businesses across Hartford to raise awareness for social justice in our community, in Connecticut, and in the nation. And we shared information about completing the census. And also for week three, we shared photos from the SOCA Run and shared the importance of completing the census, as well as addressed any common concerns. As we welcome you to our week four, we are holding the culminating month-long campaign with you. And at this point, we know that we have reached about 68.8% of census completion in Connecticut. We know that voter registration, as you all know here today, and completing the census impacts our health and well-being through the proper representation and advocacy in communities, as well as through resource allocation and through redesigning mechanisms to change the status quo. And now I turn the mic over to our esteemed officer, Dr. Selena Osai.
Good evening, everybody. Today we are highlighting 5 organizations. I'm happy to welcome Representative Robin Porter, Bridgeport Now, Generation Now, CT Early Childhood Alliance, CT Public Health Association, and Health Equity Solutions, and Connecticut Voices for Children. These are organizations that have been critical in the last year, or some a couple of years now, and others in the last several decades, working very hard in the community. We are bringing the new organizations and veteran organizations together to offer 5-minute snippets of their efforts. And towards the end of the conversations, we'll open up any other organizations that are present with us today to share some of, to give us insights into some of their work and open up the discussions for Q&A. Everybody's muted, and if you would like to speak, just Use the chat feature, leave questions, and I'll moderate towards the end. Use the raise the hand button as well, and I'll call on you. I'm going to be introducing our first speaker for the night, Mr. Merrill Gay, who is the Executive Director for CT Childhood Alliance. Prior to joining Alliance in 2013, Merrill was the Executive Director of the Coalition for New Britain's Children. He has served on a number of early childhood initiatives, including the New Britain School Readiness Council, New Britain Head Start Policy Council, Early Childhood Finance Project Work Group, Early Childhood Workforce Task Force, and Infant Toddler Task Force. Welcome, Mr. Merrill Gay.
Yes, it does help if I unmute. Good rookie mistake here. So the Early Childhood Alliance has been working with the Connecticut Association for Human Services and a lot of local organizations around the complete count of children in the census. A lot of people don't understand that children are the group that are least likely to be counted in the census. And we have generally a pretty good census self-response rate in Connecticut, but we have two of the cities over 100,000 at the very bottom of the rankings. Hartford had the single worst response rate of any city over 100,000 in the country, and Bridgeport wasn't far behind. So those two areas are particular problem areas. I don't know if I can share a screen or not, but if I can share a screen, I could do, let's see, host is disabled screen sharing.
Go ahead and share your screen.
Okay. So this is, well, okay, it's got to actually come up before so you can see it. This is a map of the areas, the red areas are the places that have the lowest census participation and the places where we expect the largest undercounts of children. So if we look at New Haven, for instance, when we zoom in there, you can see the parts of town that the current, if I click on a particular census tract here, this is a census tract that currently has a self-response rate of 39.9%. And you've got a lot of those that are in that, 45, 48, 36. And so when you look at the reasons why children don't get counted in the census, it's a little different than the reasons that adults don't get counted. Typically, adults don't get counted when nobody fills out the form at that household. A lot of children get missed because somebody fills out the form for the household but doesn't include the children. And that's for lots of different reasons. One of the places where we see children least likely to be counted is if they live in a multi-generational household, where parents or grandparents are seeing them as either staying there just temporarily and maybe they shouldn't get counted here, or that they're living in some place where kids aren't supposed to actually live, like senior housing. And just lots of distrust about letting the government know how many people are in the household. So we've been trying to get the word out that it's really, really important to count all the kids, because if we miss a 4-year-old, that 4-year-old and all of the resources that come with that child in the form of federal grant money gets missed until they're 14. So their entire elementary school and part of their middle school career, the funding for schools, the funding for hospitals, the funding, you know, all of the, I think the estimate is it's something like $2,900 per person missed per year. So that's a lot of money that gets missed whenever we miss a child. So particularly as lots of people are now trying to catch up getting their vaccines for school, reminding everybody about the importance of getting counted in the census would be really, really helpful. So I think, you know, the other reasons that are particularly noted as reasons why children don't get counted, they live in they don't speak English. They live in immigrant households that aren't documented. They are renters. They frequently live in multi-generational households where you have a lot of people in the household. And all of those things contribute to people not filling out the census form completely. So I would love to have your help in trying to reach folks with the importance of doing the census. We really are in a perfect storm now with COVID and with national leadership that really is not eager to count everybody. The Census Bureau has really been struggling through this. There are, you know, a lot of dedicated professionals there trying to get an accurate count, but it seems like they just can't catch a break this year. So that's part of why it's really important that everybody help out, and there has been a really unprecedented effort this year to mobilize civil society around getting everybody counted. But we hadn't really expected COVID. We just thought it was going to be trying to count more people with less money. So it's a real challenge this year. All right, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much.
Stop sharing.
So I was supposed to start with the poll. I'm going to launch the poll now, and then we'll go to our next speaker. Okay. Okay. I think everybody got a chance, so I'll end the polling now. Thank you, Meryl, for your presentation. And as we can see, this is what access to healthcare is the most pressing need we all feel. We'll hear from our next speaker from the Advocacy Committee of the Connecticut Public Health Association. We have Roberta Friedman, who is a public health policy consultant and previously worked as the Director of Public Policy at the Rudd Center for Food Policy and Obesity for Yale University and the University of Connecticut. She currently serves as the chair of the Advocacy Committee for the Connecticut Public Health Association. Thank you for joining us, Roberta. Roberta, can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm on my phone and I unmuted my phone, but you still can't hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay, all right, very good. I don't know what was going on with the other thing. I haven't had that problem before. Anyway, thank you for the introduction and thank you to the association for having me. As Selena said, I'm the chair of the advocacy committee for the Connecticut Public Health Association, which is the state affiliate of the American Public Health Association. And we are a group of public health professionals, including community health workers and students all across the state. And CPHA offers opportunities for networking and for advocacy, for mentoring. And we're also having our upcoming annual meeting, which is going to be virtual this year. And it's a chance for researchers and students to present their public health work. So registration is opening on the 9th for that. So I hope you'll first join CPHA and also join us at the annual meeting. So what we aim to do with the advocacy committee is to increase members' understanding of the importance of advocacy, the importance of speaking up, and we talk about the whole advocacy process on the local, state, and federal level. So full disclosure, we haven't done much on the advocacy committee with the census or with getting out the vote, but once that happens, and once the elections are over, it's going to be really, really crucial to get the state legislature, especially, to hear from everybody on public health bills that they think are important. Because if we don't speak up, the opposition will, and the legislators will be listening to the opposition, and they won't hear our voices, and they won't know that there's another way to think about these bills and another way to go with them. So in order to do that, what we do on the advocacy committee is a training. I've been doing a training on public health advocacy, sort of 101, how to do it, how to talk to your legislator, how to write testimony, things like that. And we'll have to do it virtually this year. It's usually in February. And the focus has been on health equity for the past several years. But it's, you know, it's just that we get a lot of people who've been doing advocacy for years who come and take the training, and for people brand new to advocacy as well. So we're doing those trainings on a yearly basis. We're also, this year, starting with the new legislative session, we're going to be tracking all the public health legislation. We can't possibly write testimony on all of it, but we're going to do a poll of the members to see what they're most interested in. And for those public health bills, we'll be writing fact sheets, we'll be writing sample testimony that people can use to go to, I don't know if they'll be virtual this year, but go to public health committee meetings and make a point about what they want the legislators to know about the importance of the bills, things like that. So we'll be tracking that and sending out alerts. So again, I hope you join CPHA so you can get those. We also, on behalf of the entire association, we send out testimony. We sometimes write op-eds. We write letters to the editor. We get the word out about public health in any way that we can, and in all the ways that we can. And I'm working with 3 other members on an executive committee now for the advocacy committee, because there's a lot to do, and you know, I can't do it myself. So I'm hoping that we're going to be building relationships with legislators this year, and maybe going back to holding a legislative breakfast as well. And we will participate in coalition work with other public health organizations as we can. And when they send alerts about public health issues, we'll be supporting them as well. So that's the basic stuff that the Advocacy Committee is doing. And again, I hope you are interested in joining Connecticut Public Health Association, and you'll join me and my 3 colleagues on the Advocacy Committee as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Roberta. Our next speaker is Jennifer Quay Hudson. Jennifer is the External Affairs Director at Connecticut Voices for Children. She leads on communications design and public relations, events and community engagement, as well as movement building and equity. She's part of the program team. Great to have you with us tonight, Jennifer.
Hi, Selena. Good to be here. I wanted to give a broad overview of our census report that we put out back in October when we were advocating for more outreach dollars coming from our state legislator to make sure that people understood that there was going to be a census. And then I think after that, I'll talk a little bit about our fiscal coalition work that we are embarking on now to ensure that in years to come, there is enough money to move forward in those efforts. So because I'm speaking a little bit to the choir here, I'm gonna gloss over some of the high points here. I'm sure that none of this information is new to you all, but we all know that young children under 5 are the most likely to be undercounted, and the Census Bureau estimates that about 4.6% of children under 5 go undercounted. For families of color, these numbers jump, with 6.3% of Black children and 7.5% of Hispanic children under 5 going undercounted. And while racial and ethnic data breakdowns are not available at the state level, 3.3% of children under 5 overall in Connecticut go uncounted. We know from our report that we published back in October that 54% of Hispanic families and 55% of Black families live in hard to count tracts compared to 15% of white families. And so we also know that Black and brown children are at a higher risk of being undercounted than the state average would suggest. Additionally, our research showed that of large counties, we have found that higher undercount children is most closely related to areas that have children living with grandparents and children living with non-relatives. Specifically in Connecticut, 12.4% of children live in households where they are not the biological children of the householder. We're talking about children in the care of DCF who live with foster families and children who may live with grandparents or other relatives. And if we zoom in for a moment and we take a look at New Haven in particular, of our 103,000 residents in New Haven, 93,000 of those residents live in hard to count tracts. So that's about 72% of our population in town. And we can assume that these numbers include a significant amount of families with children. So there are a couple of things to consider in terms of why children are going undercounted. And again, as a reminder, this is a broad overview of our paper. Parents might be in fact taking the census, but simply leaving their children off. Some families have experienced trauma and fatigue with the amount of government applications and paperwork they're required to complete. Families who maintain SNAP, Medicaid, and other state benefits may just grow tired of completing forms and providing sensitive information over and over and over about their families and their children, and so they just don't complete the census at all. And then, of course, parents don't take the census at all, which is why it would leave very young children undercounted. So it's also important to know that when we are communicating with families about the census, that they know that they need to include each member of the family, including small children. So in the report, we go into a little bit of a breakdown around how many dollars we bring in because of the census. So yearly, as a result of the census, Connecticut gets about $10.7 billion from the federal government for integral programs. At a high level, our report, I'm sorry, my little people are home, so you're gonna hear them screaming in the background. So at a high level, we're talking about $338 million for K-12 education, $1.34 billion for secondary education, including subsidized loans for Pell Grants and families, 8.4 billion for affordable housing, 4.6 billion for Medicaid, 908 million for Medicare, and 908 million for transportation, including the construction and repair of highways and roads. So, you know, obviously in light of economic barriers, more families are facing, due to major closings to COVID-19, it feels pertinent to add that if we take a more granular look at the numbers, 1 billion goes towards ensuring families have SNAP and food stamps and housing vouchers alone, and $80 million a year gets set aside for the school lunch program. So in all, we're talking about a significant amount of federal dollars that come into the state to support integral safety nets for children and families. So obviously, I'm preaching to the choir. We know why it's important to have families complete the census. I just wanted to give you a broad overview of what we're looking at standing to lose if we're not doing adequate outreach. Our full report is available on our website, ConnecticutVoices.org, and I can actually send that to this group immediately after this call. So if anybody has questions about that, please feel free to send them along to me in the chat.
Jennifer, before we transition, I wanted to know if you can talk a little bit about the coalition that you all have started and sort of the recruitment efforts in that regard.
Yeah, so as of late, we are working on building out a fiscal coalition. So if anybody knows anything about Connecticut Voices for Children, we produce research in 3 buckets: our fiscal and economic research, our family economic security research, and our emerging issues, which allows us to respond to the shifting political landscape. Typically, we do our work through coalitions, so we push our policy making work through coalitions and building coalitions with other community-based organizations. I think historically, those coalitions have been sort of at the higher level. They've been at sort of at the you know, we build coalitions among organizations who have very close, very good sort of legislative connections. I think around these fiscal issues this year, we know that there are conversations about reparations happening. There are conversations about the government providing more significant support to families. Universal basic income is a conversation that's happening. And we're looking at, okay, if we're having all of these really big conversations about how our society spends money to support folks and their families, how are we going to raise this money and how are we doing it in an equitable way? So historically, we have not engaged regular sort of community members in our fiscal work. I think community members and community-based organizations have been much more sort of interested or aligned with our family economic security work that really looks more at childcare and healthcare. But in our fiscal work, right, I think it's a harder conversation to have across lines. It's a harder conversation to engage folks who are not specifically engaged in fiscal work in their regular sort of everyday lives. So this conversation around the fiscal coalitions, we really want to bring community-based organizations into this fiscal conversation, right? No matter where you are sort of in the advocacy space or within your respective industries, whether that's healthcare, whether you're doing direct service through, you know, providing SNAP benefits or reentry benefits, we understand that all of this work is intersectional, right? And we know that no matter where you are, there's a connection to this fiscal work. The way our state raises its dollars really defines our state's values, right? And so if we're looking at the state budget and where they're allocating the dollars, we understand what our state really thinks is important. We believe that if more voices were at the table asking these questions and having these conversations about what our state is doing fiscally, that we could hold our state much more accountable to providing not just the basic needs for families, but making sure that people can live robust lives, right? We don't want families to just be receiving like bare minimum SNAP benefits, bare minimum healthcare benefits, bare minimum housing benefits. We know that housing is a basic human right. Food is a basic human right. Childcare should be a basic human right. I think that's the way that we should all be thinking about it. And just for context, I am the co-chair of the Early Care Alliance. Hi, Meryl. Universal healthcare should be a thing. We can't do this stuff without looking at the way that our state is funding these programs. And so through our fiscal coalitions, we are inviting community-based organizations to be a part of this conversation, whether you are linked specifically to, if your work directly links to fiscal work or not. So over the course of the past couple of months, we've been all over the state and introducing this idea of fiscal coalitions to community-based organizations and inviting regular members of the community to also have a seat at the table. We know that too often legislation happens on communities and not in partnership with communities, and those voices are left off the table. And so we are inviting those folks to be a part of the coalition as well. I can send information out about the coalition directly after this call as well. Those first meetings have already happened, and our second meeting for this fiscal coalition is happening next week with all of the regions. We have about 100 members at this, 100 community-based organization members at this point, and would love for all of you to join and be a part of that conversation.
Thank you.
I know I talk very fast. I hope you got that all. I was trying to stay within my 3 minutes.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Our next speakers are Callie Gale Heilman and Jermaine Davis. They are both co-directors from the Bridgeport Generation Now organization. Callie is a co-founder and current co-director, and is very passionate and dedicated to community capacity building, community empowerment, and change through civic and social action. She's also the co-founder of Design Night Out, Farm to Street Dinner, and Hartford Print. She serves on the boards of a variety of community organizations like CT Core, Organize Now. Jamim, who serves as a co-director as well, is also the author of the book Make Life Work, Personal Growth for Today's Entrepreneur, and has used her background in film and media to serve her community by helping individuals and organizations tell their stories. Welcome, Callie Gale and Jamim.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I am Jamim Davis, and I'm currently the Vice President and Co-Director of Bridgeport Generation Now, along with Callie. And we are a social action network committed to increasing civic engagement in Bridgeport. We are definitely a Bridgeport-focused, Bridgeport-led, led by Bridgeport residents to see our city blossom into what we know it can be. People talk about Bridgeport all the time and all the problems that are here in Bridgeport, but we see the beauty that already exists here, and we want to amplify that. And we definitely are working to have the voices of our community heard through our local government. What has emerged as our priority issues at Gen Now is dismantling systemic corruption and racism, voting and voting rights. So we have been working diligently for 4 years to hold our elected officials accountable. We do that through several different means. We do a Civics 101 workshop every year to help educate the public around what the roles of our leaders are, like what does the city council do, what do our state legislators do, what do state reps do, things like that. We have also spent a lot of time and energy trying to get a handle on what is happening in terms of democracy in our city. We have one of the lowest voter turnout rates in the state, and what we found is that people are really depressed about the system, like depressed about how the system works in Bridgeport, and really don't believe that their voices matter. So we have been working to strengthen voting rights. In particular, we have registered people to vote. We've talked to them about the importance of voting and polled them on their issues. And we are tackling the biggest impediment to voting and safe and fair elections in Bridgeport, which is the absentee ballot abuse and fraud problem that we have here. We do not have quote voter fraud, where voters go and go to the polls and vote twice and do things like that. What we have is a systemic problem where local politicians and political operatives take advantage of the community's most vulnerable populations, our elderly, our young people, our poor people, and monolingual Spanish-speaking folks. And they convince them to vote via absentee ballot. They get applications for them, so they get, when people receive their ballots, they coerce them into voting for who they want to vote for. They fill out their ballots, they forge their ballots, they sign their ballots. There's like lots of things going on here in Bridgeport. So currently, well, last year, we sued the GANM campaign. So we helped some voters to sue the GANM campaign because they had engaged in lots of nefarious activity. And we have been advocating for an election monitor in Bridgeport, and cross our fingers that that is going to go through the special session that is coming up this September. But we are working diligently on voting rights here in Bridgeport. We are also an organization that is committed to the census and having everyone counted. And I'll let Callie talk about that since she's been leading that work this year.
Thanks, Jameen. Yeah. Yes, we are truly a community-based organization that does our work through a community organizing lens. So the priority issues that you just heard Jameen talk about really are issues that have come up through our membership. So we try to do our work through that sort of like, like bottom up approach. And absentee ballots, I just wanted to highlight, everyone is learning about them now for the first time because the access to them has been expanded under COVID. But Bridgeport, if you're a voter in Bridgeport, you understand absentee ballots and have for generations because it's really been a tool for both election rigging and voter suppression in our city. So I'm just like really proud when I hear Jameen lay out the work that we're doing. I'm always just so proud because it really takes a lot of bravery and courage to address the issues that nobody really wants to tackle. And in terms of the census, so we knew last year, at Civics 101, actually, we had members of the Census Bureau come from Washington and give a presentation to Civics 101. It was very policy wonky, and so, not very well attended. It wasn't the most popular workshop. But what we got out of that dialogue is that, we understood that the hard to count communities was going to be a really big issue, and that Bridgeport historically is a hard to count community. And so we started to think about how we would play a role in that. And through Fairfield County Community Foundation, we got a grant to do census work. And we used, again, like our community organizing lens to hold 3 weekends of trainings for residents to come and get trained on the census, what the census is, why it's important, how to talk about it, how to talk to your neighbors about it. And then we organized a weekend-long canvas where, this was in March, so pre-COVID, where people went out, very early March, like, let me add, where about 40 Bridgeport residents went out and over the course of Saturday and Sunday knocked on 600 doors in Bridgeport in our targeted hardest to count areas to speak with residents about the census from their own point of view and their own perspective. Because what we found in doing that, and what continues to be one of the biggest issues here in Bridgeport, is that people don't trust the census. They don't trust the local government or the federal government for that matter. And it really, in a lot of ways requires that, like neighbor to neighbor skill, right, of talking to each other, having the conversation with people who you trust. So our impact on the response rate in Bridgeport, may be small in the grand scheme of, the task at hand. But I like to think that we made a big impact in terms of those 40 people being like census ambassadors now, and having gone out and had many more conversations beyond that weekend. And we also, a handful, I would say 5 or 6 of those residents then went on to actually get jobs with the census. So we actually did a little like mini workforce development in that regard too. So I think that, it's, to me, like having seen it in action and having heard the narratives that came back from the door to door, the biggest issue this year is the lack of, just like robust door-to-door canvassing that could happen if not for COVID. And in Bridgeport, like, because language is a barrier, because trust in the government is a barrier, like it just is, it's unfortunate. And like, if I had a magic wand, I would say, we need to postpone the final count until COVID is over and we can actually do a real, census count. So, but we're going to keep pushing it as long as the census is open.
Thank you so much, Callie, for all your work and efforts. For our next speaker, I'm going to be showing a video. Give me 1 second. I'm sharing a video from Health Equity Solutions. Can you all see my screen and the video?
Yep.
Okay.
Good evening. Thank you so much for inviting Health Equity Solutions to speak today. My name is Samantha Liu. I am the Policy Analyst and Advocacy Specialist at HES. Health Equity Solutions advocates for change through legislation, regulatory actions, and ensuring that decision makers are aware of key health equity priorities in our state. The COVID-19 pandemic has amplified stark health disparities already faced by Connecticut's people of color, who bear
Oh, Selena, I think the sound cut out.
response.
Can you hear it now?
Its policy priorities are
Yes.
inclusion, coverage and services, addressing barriers to health, and race and ethnicity data. These areas cover policies such as appointing an equity monitor to engage in policy discussions, expanding Medicaid eligibility, and utilizing community health workers and doulas to bridge barriers to health through culturally and linguistically appropriate care. Consistently collecting and publishing health data broken down by race, ethnicity, and preferred language makes it possible to evaluate who, how, and where disparities occur. The census is an important source of this data. The 2020 Centennial Census will inform where federal funding is allocated and will impact our communities for the next 10 years. The needs of those who are undercounted may be masked by averages, and Black and Brown people have been undercounted in the past census efforts. When everyone is counted, we have the information we need to evaluate the impact of policies on equity. Measuring inequities is also important as a way to acknowledge and address them. Another way to intentionally address racial injustice is to declare racism a public health crisis. Health Equity Solutions is working with towns and cities to pass resolutions, making this declaration and to hold policymakers accountable. Declaring racism a public health crisis offers a clear path to intentionally acknowledging and addressing disparities and inequities, and can catalyze and authorize data analysis, policy analysis to prevent unintentional injustices, and implementation of policies and actions to dismantle and course correct problematic systems. In other words, once we urge elected officials at all levels of government to make this value statement and take a firm stance against racism, we can hold them accountable for taking the steps to address the injustice in our systems and policies. For more information about how to take action, including how to urge your town to adopt a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis, please visit our site at hesct.org. And thank you so much for your time today, and please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So that was Health Equity Solutions that had a conflicting schedule and couldn't join us today. We appreciate them sending us a video. I'm not sure if Representative Porter is with us. So I'm going to launch the second poll, and that is going to be asking a question related to voting. Here you go. Okay. Have a couple more people. 13 out of 18 isn't bad. I'll end the poll now and share the results. So majority of us think safety will be the biggest barrier that may impact community members, followed by accessibility, and then transportation. Thank you for participating in the poll. Okay. I'm gonna turn over to Chi, so she can lead the Q&A section of the agenda. If you have any questions after hearing from all our wonderful speakers about the work that they do, please, you can type them into the chat box or raise your hand using the raise your hand tool, and I will call on you.
Great. Thank you so much, Selena. Thank you to all of our speakers. That was extremely exciting and very invigorating to hear about the work that you all are currently doing and how it has such a heavy impact on where we currently are now in our society. And so I want to touch base on our first poll question, which discussed what were some of the most necessary community impacts for the communities that you belong in. And there was sort of an overwhelming agreement in the fact that all of those areas, whether it was transportation, access to healthcare, which was the number one that had the highest percentage that's affecting the community in which you live or the community that you work in. And so I wanted to turn it over to anyone who wanted to sort of discuss or had anything to say regarding to that. And I'm specifically talking about Angela Harris, who does a lot of work in the city of Hartford on those key topics. So Angela, what were some of your thoughts?
Hi, so I put it in the chat that was actually a trick question in my mind because all of the above was not an option. You know, I just really think all those areas are critical, particularly to communities of color and those that live in our urban centers, regardless of socioeconomic status. So I will leave it at that because regardless of your income, if you live in neighborhoods where you have to go outside of your neighborhood for basic needs like food, it's a problem.
Thank you so much, Angela. And so to sort of piggyback on that, when we look at neighborhoods that have that are more associated with being urban populations, we think of Bridgeport, New Haven, Hartford, these much bigger cities. And Callie and Janine, you do a lot of your work in the Bridgeport area. So what are some of your thoughts when we think of the needs in those communities and how the impact the census has on those different areas?
Sorry, can you say the question one more time?
Okay. So when you think of large cities that, when we think of the needs in these communities, right? So it goes back to our first poll question. Selena, can you actually state the question again, just so I can make sure I'm not misquoting in any capacity? So the question is, what was the most important need to address in your community? And access to healthcare reigned as number one. So when we think of the city like Bridgeport and a lot of the work that you do, how can we tie in the importance of the census to these different community needs, whether it's food access, housing, transportation, or just equitable access to healthcare overall?
I'll just start by echoing a little bit of what Angela said. It's really hard to answer that question when the needs in the community people need all of those things and more in the community. So for instance, if there's on the east end of Bridgeport, right, there is no grocery store. There's no grocery store. People got to get to the grocery store, so you need transportation. They don't have any transportation, they got to find another way. They don't have a grocery store. They're going to the corner store to buy food, which is not as healthy as food they can get from, a grocery store. There's like everything builds on the other thing. So it's difficult. And so in terms of the census, like if we are going to receive money from the federal government for those things, for healthcare, for transportation, for public transportation, for all of these things, then it is critically important that the city does a good job of getting people motivated even to answer the census, right? But because we do not have a competent government, right? So we don't have a leadership, in my opinion, of people who really care about those people who need those things. It's just, you're going to see census rates like the ones you see now, right, in Bridgeport. And it's sad, but I don't know that rate is going to go up because, we have the needs on top of people who don't care, on top of corruption, on top of, voter suppression, so.
Pandemic.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah. And I'll just add that it really, you know, like in the next 10 years, our work is to try and, like Jamim said, like realize the city that we know is possible, and that requires innovative anti-racist leadership. And so part of our work is going to be about how to build that leadership in Bridgeport, specifically for Bridgeport, and then the money can be, you know, hopefully used in innovative anti-racist ways that don't uphold the nonprofit industrial complex, that aren't about getting a casino to Bridgeport. You know, there's, we just have to move ourselves forward and hope and keep that hope that that work that, you know, we're doing, that base building grassroots work, will blossom, you know, and become real.
Absolutely. And I think that's so vital. And so it is when we think of, you know, health equity overall, and in our efforts and our attainment to get there, everything sort of always boils down to the social determinants of health, and how do we sort of reach that space, especially at these very critical times. Yes.
Would you mind if I have just another opportunity to add one more thing to my statement earlier?
Go ahead.
As you know, you had folks on talking about advocacy and finances, appropriations and allocation of funds. You know, we get a one shot every 10 years to weigh in, right? To count everyone. The other side of the coin is that that same census has impact on your voice, on how you can elect people to represent you, because redistricting happens every 10 years based on this same census. So the way they decide that district, can you hear me?
Yeah, you cut out a little bit. So if you could just repeat most of what you said.
Okay, I will also use the headphones. 60% of a district is Windsor, and 40% of the district is Hartford. So currently the seated representative is Brandon McGee. And he's a resident of Hartford, but he has to work both sides of that district. And the Windsor district is 60% of the overall vote. So if he gets a challenger that actually lives in Windsor, it becomes, if he doesn't actually work both sides of the district, it's more likely that he would lose the seat. So then now the folks in Hartford may or may not get adequate representation by someone whose home base is Windsor. So that happens on the state level, the city level, but most importantly, it happens on the federal level. So how many senators do you get to send? How many congressmen do you get to send to Washington to represent you? It's based on those numbers. Those are the people that determine the appropriations that then get pushed down to the state, that then the state representatives then push to the community. So it's just a domino effect of, if this count isn't right, it makes the work that we all do more difficult, because we're not getting adequate funding or representation based on the response rate. So if we don't do this now, we get another 10 years to suffer with the consequences, right? So even with the pandemic, it behooves us to do everything humanly possible to get every man, woman, and child to be counted, not just for the dollars, but so that their voices can be heard and they can be adequately represented on all levels of government. So their needs can be met so that they have a voice, so they are represented both locally, your city, state, town, and on the federal level.
Thank you so much, Angela. And echoing everything you said and the importance of why we launched this campaign for all of August, and a lot of that kudos goes to Allison, Jocelyn, and Selena for curating this and having each week dedicated to advocacy and community engagement and networking, and pulling together this very strong core group to sort of pull it all together to see how everything's going to look as we move into the end of 2020, as we move into the election season, and just, essentially continuously moving our efforts and our strategies to enhance and eliminate any barriers for voting, especially for those in our marginalized communities, and just empowering them to ensure that their voices are heard. So to be respectful of time, I wish we can sort of discuss even more. I want to turn it over to Keon Callender, who's the treasurer of NACI Connecticut, who's essentially going to close us out.
Thank you, Chi, and thank you to all of our speakers tonight and everyone for tuning in. As Chi mentioned, my name is Keon Callender. I'm the treasurer for the Connecticut chapter of NACI, and advocacy is really the core of what we do. We were created over 50 years ago on an advocacy platform to make sure that voices that were historically marginalized, particularly Black voices across the country, had a voice in terms of healthcare delivery and access to care. And the census and voting is such a crucial element of that. And when we talk about voting, a lot of people often say it doesn't matter who you vote for as long as you vote. But it does matter. Our votes or lack thereof have consequences. Our votes can change things, and it's up to all of us to be a part of the current moment that we're in related to ending systemic racism, and really being a part of the movement. On our website that you can see here, in partnership with Health Equity Solutions, we have their petition on our website where you can sign that petition and really add your voice to dismantling racism all across the state. So in closing, I just wanted to highlight one upcoming event that NACI is having this upcoming weekend. We're partnering with the Urban League of Greater Hartford Young Professionals for their annual back to school drive and community day. So, we know it's that time of the year where students are going back to school, and, obviously many of our districts are not going back in a virtual format. Many are going back in person, and there are some districts that don't have the resources that others do. So, we're certainly making some inroads in terms of giving back to the community and making sure that as many children as possible have what they need to be successful in the school year ahead. So thank you all for joining our session tonight. Feel free to visit our website at nacict.org for more information. And if you would like to get involved with NACI, that information is on our page as well, nacict.org/join. So thank you all and have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.